Majority of the videos and news articles that you read these days highlight that China is going to beat US, China is going to be the next superpower, and it will lead the world for the coming decades. In this video, however, I want to present a contrarian view on why China will struggle. And I want to divide this video into three parts. What is the definition of superpower and how can we call China as a superpower? Number two, what are some of the issues that it is currently struggling with? And number three, what does it mean to the rest of the world? Let's get started with the first point. What is the definition of superpower? It can be defined in three ways, with its economic power or military power or political power around the world. If we look at China from an economic standpoint, it has grown by roughly 9% every single year. The GDP has grown by 9% on average every year from 1978 for 45 straight years. This is crazy. Now, if you compare it with US, the average GDP growth rate is somewhere between 2 to 4% over the last 45-50 years. And that's the reason why, if you look at the rankings of the countries by their GDP, US is number 1 and China is number 2. And there are predictions that China will overtake US in the next few years. And why? What happened in 1978 which led to this drastic change in the fortunes of China, primarily from an economic perspective? Because in 1978, Chinese government has introduced reforms which led to active participation of foreign investors into their market. Until then, it was a closed country. Privatization was also allowed. Individuals like you and me can own businesses. If you remember, something like this has happened in India as well in 1991. Then Prime Minister Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao and also the Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, both of them are considered to be the modern decision makers of how we are currently operating within India from an economic standpoint. Something very similar happened to China in 1978. And that's the reason from that point in time, the entire curve, the growth curve for China has changed. Now, we need to also look into how globalization and privatization have changed the Chinese fortunes, because those are the metrics that are currently changing now. If you think about it, until 1978, Chinese individuals, Chinese companies did not have any kind of access to the tech that was already there in the rest of the world. So when the Western countries bought the tech to China, the productivity of the country immediately increased. And that's the reason why almost 48% of this entire GDP growth over the last 50 years has been attributed to productivity growth. Even the economists are surprised by this fact. If you look at this article from 1997, published by International Monetary Fund, exactly the economists are saying the same thing. The second thing which also contributed to the growth is the cheap labor that was available in China. However, this cheap labor is now changing. If you look at the average age of population in China right now, it is 38 years. Compare it with India. India is 28 years. And what does it mean? It means that most of the people are now getting into their 60s, 70s, and they can't contribute to the growth of the economy. And also, the folks who are in their 20s and 30s are now taking care of the elders. So they cannot, let's assume, manufacture more cycles or more products that they can export to the rest of the world. China is, of course, considered as the default factory of the world. That's on one end. The labor, the contribution of the labor itself is going down. Irrespective of what the Chinese government is trying to do, to have 2 kids, to promote growth rates within the population, it's just not working. The second thing is also the labor is not cheap anymore. If you look at what happened in 2022 November, there were protests in the Foxconn factory over the wage issues. Well, Foxconn is the default iPhone maker for Apple. So, labor shortage coupled with also not cheap anymore, right? Both these factors are contributing to their productivity declines. Now, let's look into the impact of technology. Well, 1978s, 88s, 99s, all these years, the technology was just coming in. So all the easy pickings on the ground were already taken. Now, the new technology, for it to make similar impact is very difficult. For example, the high-speed rail came between Beijing and Shanghai in 2008. Now, there is no scope for another high-speed rail between these two cities. There is only a scope for additional high-speed rails between China and Tibet, but that would not provide the same economic impetus that a Shanghai-Beijing train has provided previously. So you can see the new technologies might not create that impact, and new opportunities, the return on that investment would also be low. So from an economic standpoint, China is looking at that flattening of the growth. Did it already reach its peak? There are some fantastic articles written on Economist this week itself on this same topic. Please go ahead and read them if you can. I'll give them the links in the description box. Now, what does this mean to you and me? The first thing, China does realize that its economic growth cannot continue at the same pace for the next few decades. So it started utilizing the other two things, that is its military and political powers. Now, what is this political power all about? China has started the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI initiative, where it is going to invest in 150 countries in different sectors, infrastructure and energy sectors primarily. And why is this important? Because China already has an excess production of steel, cement, and it can basically export to these 150 countries where it is investing. So you can see these guys are producing for the world. If US, Western Europe does not buy this, it's fine. They have these 150 countries where they can export their overproduced goods. The second thing is also the energy. They are tying deals in such a way that they are improving the energy infrastructure in these countries so that they need energy from these guys to continue growing at whatever pace it might be. Now, this also increases the influence of Chinese government in these 150 countries. You can think about Sri Lanka, you can think about the entire Africa, you can also now add Russia to that list because they are doing business together in their own currencies, keeping US dollar aside. All these 150 currencies, of course, the Chinese governments would push to continue doing business in their own currencies. What will this lead to? Of course, US is not going to like this, so there is some kind of destabilization that we can expect going forward, and that's not good for anybody else in the world. Now, the second factor is about the military might of China. The last active war that Chinese were involved in was in 1979 with Vietnam. They did not even involve in any active war. So, they do not even know what's the might of their military. They were not tested actively. If we have to go by the latest Russia-Ukraine war, it is not easy for China to say that, hey, we are military superpowers and we'll go and capture any country that we want to, because Russia is a military superpower, but still they are facing a lot of resistance in Ukraine. The entire Western world came to the support of Ukraine. Now, if China does something similar with any other country, it doesn't know what it will lead to. So the military questions still exist, and the geopolitical answers are leading to destabilization of the entire world, while the economic growth curve is declining. That is where China is right now, and well, it might overtake the US versus not. In terms of GDP in the next few years is for us to see, but to become a superpower and to control all these elements, the political, the military, and also the economic factors is not that easy. If you like the video, please go ahead and share it with your friends so that they also understand the contrarian view of why China might not succeed. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you again in the next video. Bye-bye.